Every hunter knows the silence of the woods can be unsettling, but sometimes that silence hides something far more terrifying than any wild animal. Tonight, we'll step deep into the wilderness where four hunters experienced horrors beyond imagination. These are true stories from those who ventured out to hunt and ended up being hunted themselves. Stay with me until the last story, because what happened to that final hunter is so disturbing. Even seasoned outdoorsmen refuse to set foot in those woods ever again. Welcome to 4 scary true hunting horror stories. But beware, after hearing these, you might never look at the forest the same way again. Story number 1, The Whispering Woods. It was a late autumn evening when Jake, an experienced hunter, ventured deep into the Pine Hollow forest. The sky was dimming, painting the treetops in fading shades of orange and red. The wind carried a sharp chill, but the woods were otherwise unnaturally quiet, too quiet. Not a single bird call, no distant animal sounds, just silence. Jake adjusted his rifle strap and kept moving, unaware that this hunt would turn into a nightmare he'd never forget. After about an hour, Jake set up near a clearing. He crouched low, scanning the area for deer tracks. That's when he heard it, a faint whisper drifting through the trees. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then he realized the sound had rhythm, like words being spoken. "Come closer," the voice seemed to say, soft but clear enough to send chills down his spine. He froze, listening intently. The whisper stopped. Thinking it was his imagination, he shook it off and continued. But just a few minutes later, the voice came again, this time closer, circling him, yet he could see no one. Jake's heart began to pound. He slowly turned, scanning the tree line with his flashlight, but the beam revealed only twisted branches and thick underbrush. Suddenly, a twig snapped directly behind him. He spun around, rifle raised, but again, nothing. The forest was empty, or so it seemed. The whispers started overlapping, multiple voices now, coming from all directions, impossible to pinpoint. Some sounded like children, others like hoarse, guttural growls. His instincts screamed at him to leave, yet his legs felt like lead. Jake forced himself to move toward the source of the last sound, hoping to confront whoever, or whatever, was following him. As he pushed through the trees, his flashlight landed on something that made his blood run cold. A small, abandoned hunting camp sat in a clearing. The tents were torn, claw marks raked across the fabric. Scattered gear lay on the ground, and on one of the trees a message carved deep into the bark: "They watch." Before he could react, the whispering swelled into a deafening chorus, surrounding him, pressing closer and closer, yet no figures were visible in the darkness. It was as if the forest itself had come alive, speaking directly into his ears. Panic took over. Jake bolted through the trees, branches tearing at his jacket, whispers chasing him every step of the way. When he finally burst out of the woods and reached his truck, the voices ceased instantly, replaced once again by unsettling silence. He didn't look back. Jake swears to this day that the forest was alive that night, that something unseen was stalking him, and if he had stayed one moment longer, he would have never made it out. Story number 2, The Vanishing Tracker. In the remote wilderness of Alaska, a group of 3 experienced hunters set out on a week-long expedition in search of elk. Among them was Travis, a seasoned tracker known for his uncanny ability to read the forest like a book. The landscape was vast, desolate, and brutally cold. Towering pine trees loomed overhead, and the snow muffled every sound, creating an unsettling, unnatural silence. The men were miles away from civilization, and that's exactly when things began to feel wrong. On their 3rd day, Travis noticed strange tracks in the snow, large, deep footprints that didn't match any animal they knew. They looked vaguely human, but far too long, and the stride was unnaturally wide, as if whatever made them moved on impossibly long legs. The group followed the prints, curious yet uneasy. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. Not even the wind dared to whistle through the trees. The feeling of being watched was so intense that the men started glancing over their shoulders every few steps. As dusk approached, Travis led the way through a narrow pass, following the strange trail. The others walked just a few yards behind him, until suddenly, he vanished. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. The snow beneath where he walked was undisturbed. No sign of a struggle, no additional footprints leading away. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. The remaining hunters called his name, fired shots into the air, even retraced their steps. But Travis had simply disappeared into thin air. That night, the two remaining hunters set up camp, unable to leave without their friend. As the fire crackled, they heard faint, guttural noises echoing from the darkness. Then came the screams, distant but blood-curdling, unmistakably Travis's voice. They grabbed their rifles and shouted for him, but the woods only echoed his screams before falling silent again. Moments later, they saw glowing eyes reflecting from the tree-line. Not animal eyes, too high off the ground, too still. Whatever was out there, it was watching them, studying them, waiting. At dawn, after a sleepless night, they packed up and started down the trail, shaken and terrified. Just a few hundred yards from their camp, they found Travis. He was standing in the snow, pale, shivering, his eyes wide with terror. When they asked what happened, he refused to speak, only muttering one sentence over and over. "It was hunting us." To this day, Travis has never shared what he saw or what took him that night. But he's never gone hunting again, and neither have the men who were with him. The wilderness they once knew now feels like a predator itself, alive and watching, waiting for its next victim. Some say there are things in the wild that aren't meant to be found. Travis and his friends learned that lesson the hard way and barely made it out alive. Story number 3, The Cabin in the Clearing. In the dense, uncharted woods of Montana, two friends, Evan and Luke, set out for a week of hunting elk. They were experienced outdoorsmen, used to long trips in isolation. But on their third day, as the fog rolled in and dusk approached, they stumbled across something they were never meant to find: a cabin standing alone in a small clearing. At first glance, it looked abandoned. The roof sagged, the windows were dark and cracked, and the wood was gray with age. Yet, something about the place felt wrong. The clearing was unnaturally quiet. No insects, no birds, not even the rustle of leaves. The air felt heavy, suffocating. The hunters, intrigued and a bit unsettled, decided to check it out, thinking it might be an old trapper's shelter or a good spot to rest. As they got closer, they noticed strange carvings on the wooden door, symbols they didn't recognize, sharp, jagged, and unsettling. The doorknob was ice-cold despite the mild air, and when Evan pushed it open, it creaked loudly, echoing like a scream through the forest. Inside, the cabin was empty, but not entirely. Dust-covered furniture stood in odd positions, as if someone had left in a hurry. And on the far wall, written in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "Don't hunt here." A foul, metallic smell lingered inside the cabin, making their stomachs churn. They turned to leave, but as soon as they stepped outside, the woods felt different, as though something was now aware of them. That night, they set up camp about a mile away, trying to laugh off the creepy discovery. But their sleep was shattered by knocking sounds echoing through the woods. 3 knocks at first, then silence. Minutes later, 3 more knocks, closer this time. When they shone their flashlights toward the sound, there was nothing there. But both men swore they saw a dark figure darting between trees, watching them from the distance. Around 3 a.m., Luke woke up to the sound of their hunting gear being moved outside their tent. Slowly unzipping the flap, he froze in terror. All their weapons, knives, and rifles had been laid out on the ground in a perfect circle, and in the center of that circle stood a small wooden carving of a man with no face. As soon as Evan joined him, they heard heavy breathing coming from behind their tent. The men spun around with their flashlights, just in time to see a tall, shadowy figure vanish into the trees, moving unnaturally fast, making no sound except for faint whispering that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It didn't take them long to make a decision. They grabbed what gear they could and ran through the woods, not stopping until dawn lit the forest. When they finally returned home, they reported the cabin to the local authorities. But when rangers went to investigate, the cabin was gone. No clearing, no structure, nothing but untouched forest. To this day, Evan and Luke refuse to return to that area. They believe whatever built that cabin wasn't human, and that they trespassed on something ancient and malevolent that night. Some hunters say that if you're deep enough in those Montana woods and the forest goes deathly silent, you might find the clearing too. But you won't like what's waiting there. The cabin in the clearing has never been found again. But for those who've heard the stories, They pray they never stumble across it while out hunting. Story number 4. The hunter becomes the hunted. In the remote, rugged wilderness of British Columbia, a lone hunter named Mark ventured deep into the mountains for a week-long trip. Mark was no amateur. He had survived harsh terrain, wild predators, and brutal weather. But this hunt would be unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The first 2 days were uneventful, tracks of deer here and there, but strangely, no animals in sight. The forest felt abandoned. The only sound was Mark's own footsteps, until he realized he wasn't the only one making them. Late on the second evening, as Mark set up camp, he heard heavy, deliberate footsteps crunching in the underbrush nearby. He called out, thinking maybe it was another hunter, but got no response. The sound stopped abruptly the moment he spoke, leaving the woods in dead silence. That night, he woke to the unsettling feeling of eyes on him. From inside his tent, he could hear slow breathing just outside the thin fabric barrier. When he tore open the zipper and shined his flashlight, there was nothing, yet fresh, muddy footprints circled his tent, too large to be human, too narrow to belong to any known animal. The next day, determined to track the creature or man following him, Mark noticed the unsettling pattern. Wherever he went, another set of prints followed his tracks, matching his every move, but always staying just out of sight. At one point, Mark stopped abruptly and listened. Behind him, something large stopped too. When he began walking again, it mirrored his steps. He set a trap that afternoon, a motion-activated camera and bait in a clearing. But when he checked it hours later, the bait was gone, the trap untouched, and the camera ripped from the tree, lens shattered, as if someone, or something, knew what it was and destroyed it. By nightfall, fear began to replace Mark's confidence. He built a fire, kept his rifle close, and tried to stay awake. Around 3 a.m., he heard it again, the footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the camp. Then came a low growl, deep and unnatural, reverberating through the trees. Mark raised his rifle toward the sound, but the growl shifted position instantly, now behind him, now to his left, now impossibly close to his right. And then he saw it, just for a moment, standing at the edge of the firelight. A tall, humanoid figure, impossibly thin, its limbs long and bent at wrong angles. Its eyes reflected a sickly yellow glow, unblinking, fixed on him. When Mark aimed his rifle, it vanished in a blur of motion, moving faster than anything he had ever seen, making no sound except for that haunting, guttural growl. Mark didn't wait to see what would happen next. He grabbed his essentials and ran, not daring to stop, branches slashing his arms, lungs burning, while the sound of something chasing him echoed just a few feet behind. Hours later, he burst onto a ranger trail, finally safe, or so he thought. When he returned days later with authorities to retrieve his gear, they found his campsite torn apart, claw marks gouged deep into trees, and his rifle lying on the ground, bent in half as if it were made of soft metal. The rangers told him there were no large predators in that area capable of doing such a thing. Whatever stalked him that night wasn't an animal. It was something far worse, something that hunted for sport. Mark never hunted alone again. Even now, years later, he refuses to talk about what he truly saw that night. But every so often, other hunters in those mountains report the same thing. Footsteps in the dark, something circling their camp, always just out of sight, waiting. In the wild, you might think you're the predator, but sometimes you're the prey. 4 terrifying true stories. 4 hunters who went into the woods expecting a simple hunt and instead faced horrors beyond imagination. Whispers in the dark, friends who vanish without a trace, cabins that should not exist, and a predator that wasn't human at all. The wilderness hides many secrets, and some of them are best left undiscovered. Which of these stories chilled you to the bone? Tell me in the comments below. I'll be reading them tonight, if I can sleep. If you love true horror stories that make your skin crawl, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there are darker tales waiting for you in the next video.